Hey, Walking Dead fans, welcome back to Chronocord Media and our weekly Walking Dead coverage. This week, Season 6, Episode 4, entitled Here's Not Here. I'm C-Dub, joined by my co-host, as always, JC. If you have not already, please subscribe to Chronocord Media, and if you have not seen Episode 4 of Season 6, go ahead and watch it and come right back for the discussion. JC, this was a fantastic episode after the intense Episode 3 thank you. We got to go back in time a little bit with Morgan and see how Morgan went from the crazed maniac Rick and Michonne found after Rick returned to meet Morgan for the second time, and the Morgan that we see now, who is a peaceful man trying to save everyone, even whenever it seems like it's a ridiculous notion.
Well, the action had to subside at some point, C-Dub, and now we're bringing down the energy a little bit and diving real deep into Morgan's backstory, which is much deserved. Of course, we only saw him a few times over the entire first 5 seasons, and now in Season 6, he is a featured player with his own episode. But those flashback scenes in the woods with Morgan before he found inner peace, C-Dub, he was pretty crazy. He was taking out everything living and dead all around him, including 2 innocent men in his rage. It seems his main objective is to clear the area, and that's really his prime focus of existence at that moment. It really reminds me of Season 5 with Sasha when she's losing her mind, and she's pretty much doing the same thing, going on a rage and just taking out any zombie she comes across.
I really liked Morgan as far as you could tell that he was becoming a predator and really losing his mind. I liked the camera effects when Morgan was going into a rage. And I also have to say, for that first half of the episode where we didn't get a whole lot of dialogue, there was some fantastic music and sound effects work that really conveyed a lot of great emotions and the psychosis that Morgan was experiencing at the time. Of course, the episode started out, JC, with Morgan after his battle with the wolf that he faced in Episode 2. It was revealed that Morgan actually has the guy still alive and has him held prisoner. And Morgan basically says that after that guy had asked for everything that he had, which we saw in Season 5, whenever he came across this same guy in the woods, Morgan says, "Well, you asked for everything I have, so here it is." And Morgan begins telling this story to us and both to the prisoner, the captive wolf, of how he came across this means of peace and how he believes that everyone can be saved. Like you said, JC, Morgan was going pretty crazy after his home burned down that we saw him in when Rick and Michonne went and visited him. And from there, he was on the run and happened upon the home of a sensei, an Aikido sensei by the name of Dr. Eastman, who Morgan initially almost tried to kill. I mean, he shot at him. He was trying to invade his home and take over his fortress of solitude. However, Eastman took him prisoner, or so we thought. After knocking him unconscious and put him in his home, he fed him and tried to get him to come back around. Got some really cool details about this Eastman character, and his story I thought was one of the more fascinating stories that unfolded as the episode went along.
This Eastman character showed a surprisingly high amount of patience with Morgan. I think most people in that situation in the zombie apocalypse, they wouldn't take that chance on a crazy stranger. I think Eastman definitely saw the potential in Morgan that he could turn around his psyche and get his act together. And he begins teaching him the principle of every life is precious. C-Dub, I thought it was interesting, the scene where Eastman reveals that he never locked the cell door. But as we saw when Morgan did finally come out of the door, he attacked Eastman and was promptly taken to the ground. This episode certainly progressed kind of slow, but it did a great job building the backstory of both of these characters. You know, we're introduced to a brand new guy we've never seen, and we learn quite a bit about him in a short amount of time, including the fact that he treats all of these dead zombies with such respect. He finds their wallet, gets their license, and makes them proper grave markers. I thought that was interesting because that's another trademark of Morgan that we see later on in present time.
Yeah, JC, that was also something we saw from Rick way back in episode 2 of season 1, whenever they used the zombie blood, Glenn and Rick, that is, to escape Atlanta. Kind of goes awry. However, that was something that Rick did before he killed that first zombie with the axe. He took out his wallet and his ID, and although he couldn't bury him, he did give a little speech about him and try to humanize him. And I thought that was something really good as a character trait for Dr. Eastman, being this sensei and this master of Aikido. And he seems like this guy is really, really well-centered and living probably more healthily than any other character in The Walking Dead thus far, out in the woods with his goat Tabitha making cheese. I thought that was a great revelation that Morgan wasn't lying whenever he was asked, "Where did you learn to do that?" And he said, "A cheesemaker taught me." I thought that was fantastic. And also the character development of Morgan, he kind of started to adjust. Dr. Eastman even gave him the responsibility of caring for Tabitha, the goat. And once the zombies kind of happened upon her and were about to devour her, Morgan comes out and saves the goat, however.
Yeah, that moment when he saves Eastman's goat, that's when things really started to turn around for Morgan, and he goes full Daniel's son under Eastman's tutelage. He's another Mr. Miyagi here. You see them training and picking up these staff skills. He even gives Morgan his first staff, that trusty weapon that we've seen him with. I gotta say, throughout the whole episode up until this point, I was wondering why the hell this guy has a prison cell in his house. But Sita, we do find out from Eastman himself. He mentions a prisoner he encountered while he was a psychiatrist for the state, and this prisoner escaped jail and murdered his family. And he explains that the jail cell was to kidnap this prisoner and let him starve to death. So that kind of gives us hints into Eastman's psychological state at that time, and that must have been right before the zombie apocalypse.
Later on, though, JC, whenever there's some zombies and Morgan goes out and is just about to put his skills to the test that Dr. Eastman has given him against a zombie, Morgan ends up freezing up and surprisingly happens upon the zombified version of the young man he killed earlier in the episode out in the woods. And he kind of has that moment where he freezes up. And unfortunately, although Dr. Eastman does step in and save Morgan's life, potentially, Dr. Eastman is bit, and that kind of begins the decline for him. He realizes right then and there that it's over.
And then unfortunately, C-Dub, we see the poor goat Tabitha being eaten. They head over to the graveyard, and Morgan finds Eastman, and he's burying the zombie that bit him. But you can tell that his health is fading very quickly, C-Dub. And then a particular grave marker catches Morgan's eye, and of course, it's the prisoners. So Eastman did let this guy starve to death. Pretty brutal way to make someone die. But that is the end of Eastman, C-Dub. A one-episode appearance in the show, but he certainly will leave a lasting mark, especially upon Morgan.
Yeah, JC, I thought it was interesting that before he passed away, Eastman revealed to Morgan that that picture that he had, that Morgan accidentally broke in their scuffle, that was drawn by his daughter, Eastman actually went way, way out of his way to go get that. It was a picture his daughter drew on the wall at their old house, and he wanted to go get it, much like Carl did with that picture of his mom and dad, so that he could pass it along to Judith. I thought that was a cool little flashback moment and tie-in there. Also, before Eastman decided to presumably kill himself, he gave Morgan the lucky rabbit's foot and told him, "I hope it's lucky for you in whatever decision you make." And Morgan tells him, "I've made my decision." So it looks like Morgan, that basically wraps up his psychosis and transformation from a complete psychopath to the guy that we see in Alexandria today. We flash back to the present, and the captive wolf, who Morgan let live twice now, just kind of smiles at Morgan's story and says, "You really think that I'm like that? Because if you let me go, and if I live, I'm going to kill you. And I'm going to kill everybody here." That should be an ominous warning for Morgan and the rest of the residents of Alexandria that are left.
Yeah, C-Dub, a very questionable decision to let that wolf live and lock him up. I feel like, once again, that is something you cannot do in the Walking Dead universe. You can't let these people live. They will always come back to bite you, sometimes literally. C-Dub, this might be an issue that could linger if and when Rick returns back to Alexandria, keeping this guy alive. Will Morgan tell Rick that he is keeping him prisoner? C-Dub, I believe at the very end there, before it went to black, we heard Rick yelling on the outside of the gate, yelling, "Let me in, open the gate." So we are assuming that Rick has made it back to Alexandria, if that is in fact his voice. So overall, I thought this episode was pretty good. Definitely a big drop off in intensity, action, energy, all of that. But a great way to describe Morgan's beginnings on his path to being the staffed warrior he is today.
We're going to have to see how this pans out next week on The Walking Dead Season 6, Episode 5. We're moving right along in the first half of the 6th season here, JC, and so far it's fantastic. I believe it's time now that we're going to flash back to present day in Episode 5. Everyone be sure to stay tuned for our weekly Walking Dead coverage. Subscribe if you have not already. For my co-host JC, I'm C-Dub, R.I.P. Tabitha the Goat.